All right, guys, we're going back a little bit for this next one. I love the P-51 Mustang. It's not my favorite plane. Like, if I had to pick a favorite plane, and I do love airplanes and I love history, it's not my favorite plane, but it's one of my favorite planes to build. And I was picking something else up, and I have never built one of the Airfix 148 kits. So my favorite plane, my favorite scale, figured why not? Let's give this one a shot. Now, I've built a lot of Mustangs in my life. A whole lot. And the funny thing is, I've built a lot of model airplanes, and it wasn't until, well, now, of course, looking back, 2003 is a really long time ago, but it wasn't until about 2003 that I built my first Mustang kit, and it was a disaster. I did it horribly. I wasn't very good at bare metal finishes. I didn't know much about the plane then, but through modeling usually is where I do a lot of my research on things I'm not really personally acquainted with or knowledgeable on. And I learned a lot about it. So since then, I've just done a whole lot because I love the history of the plane. I love the little quirks of it, and I love building them. They're fun to build. There's so many different options to do. So we're gonna take a look at this kit. I'm gonna show you. We're gonna do this completely out of the box. I'm gonna show you the one that we are going to build out of the box. Jersey Jerk from the 356 Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. One of the more colorful examples of markings. We're going to talk a little bit about why so many Mustangs in World War II, American anyway, had such just brazenly colorful color schemes like that too. Now, I've already looked in this kit because I couldn't help it. I had to take a look. The Tamiya kits, I built so many of them. Hasegawa, a few of them. Testers, a few of them. Airfix never did. I built a 1/24th scale Airfix a long time ago when that was like the only one on the market. I mean, years and years ago. So instructions are really nice. They're not quite full color, but they use different color to illustrate what you're working on and kind of where it should go in that phase in the assembly. Very detailed pictures of every piece that you're going to be working with. I mean, it really is very well done all the way through with call-outs for painting as you go, different options for everything as you're working. I mean, very detailed pictures of the parts. They don't skimp on the details of the parts themselves, so you really know what it is that you're working with as you're putting it all together. So lots of steps, whole lot of steps to putting this all together. Some unique steps that I haven't seen in some other P-51 kits. So some of the P-51 kits on the market kind of all fall together the same way. This has some that look similar to other ones and some that really look very different. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes together. Here is the paint number callouts and stuff with full color paint schemes there. And again, we're doing these guys. So we're going to continue looking at all the pieces in the box, and if you just want to skip, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of not the history of the plane, but the history of some of these crazy color schemes that they had on the planes in World War II, because I think it's a fascinating subject, and of the 356 Fighter Group. If you want to skip that and go right to the other pieces in the box, here's a time code to where you can skip to. But why were American Mustangs, because you didn't see a lot of other American planes painted as loud and crazy as the 8th and to a lesser extent the 9th Air Force, but mainly the 8th Air Force P-51s. A lot of these fighter groups, when they were flying P-38s and P-47s, they had their own distinct, individual kind of markings on the planes, but nothing as loud and crazy as this. The first thing is, at this time period, so why did they get rid of the, if you look back, a lot of the earlier fighters, the P-40s, which, we didn't really fly in Europe, but they were flying them just about in every other theater. First, in an air superiority role, but mostly in ground attack is what we really use the P-40 for mostly. Our other allies used it for other stuff, as actual fighters. But by the time the war started, the P-40, that's my favorite plane, but it was kind of outdated anyway. P-40s flew in kind of camouflaged colors the whole time, doing, a whole lot of ground attack work. But these escort fighters and air superiority fighters, by the end of 1944, they kind of shed their camouflage colors. Sometimes it's just all green, sometimes actual camouflage, for the all bare metal finish. They did that because we realized that but they realized that they were actually going to be able to defeat the Luftwaffe quicker and more efficiently in the air. So they wanted those planes, and some people say, like, well, they needed the green paint for tanks and stuff, getting ready for the... That's not what it came down to. They wanted the planes to be shiny and noticeable. We wanted the Luftwaffe to get off the ground and face us in the air, because at that point, while they did have some amazing aces and pilots going into our involvement in the war, we had just attrited them down. And a lot of their pilots, going into the end of 1944 into 1945, were brand new kids out of flight school. And if we could get them off the ground, our experienced pilots could kill them like that. So one of the reasons that we kind of shed the kind of subdued look of the planes for this shiny bare metal and bright loud colors was so that they would see us flying overhead, that they had no choice, they couldn't miss us, and they'd come up and engage. World War II, radar was it wasn't a brand new invention. Everybody in the world kind of invented radar around the same time, but it was top secret. Nobody told anybody they had it. But radar was still a very big, bulky thing. It wasn't like now, and every fighter plane could have a small, compact, high-power radar in the nose of the airplane. So, everything was done visually. So every fighter group having a very distinguishable color on the nose, and again, P-38s, P-51s, some P-40 groups, they did that. They would have, the spinners, sometimes just a ring around the nose. They would have some kind of distinguishing mark, but, with the P-51s, again, going for this high visibility, we're out here to be seen, they would stretch those crazy colors, those crazy patterns, checker marks, or whatever. So pilots within the same group would easily be able to see each other, identify each other, know where they were, quickly establish formation, form up, and go on their missions. And then when you had a whole group flying together, a lot of times what they would do is they'd make the rudder on the tail, or sometimes the entire tail, a specific color, so that you could identify within that group. Now you've got a very easily identifiable squadron formation, so you know where you were supposed to go. Within that, all these numbers here represented also squadron and actual aircraft. So, that way you could find your wingman. You know who you were assigned to fly with, what formation specifically, what element you were in. So you could stick with your, wingman 2-ship formation, or then you're bigger than that, your 4-ship, element flying around. And if you got separated, it was easy to find where you were supposed to be, talk to each other, where you at, and then you can visually spot each other and find the right guys and fly with each other, because there was no IFF system, there was no modes and codes, if you guys are familiar with that. So everything had to be done visually, and this was a way to accomplish that. There's also ended up being a way to a form of psychological warfare against the enemy as well. Some of these groups became very well known. Now, the 356th actually has really kind of a dubious honor as being the group in the 8th Air Force with the absolute worst loss-to-kill ratio in the entire 8th Air Force. Normally, we're really proud to talk about groups like the 4th Fighter Group or the 357th Fighter Group, the 4th Fighter Group was the most winningest American fighter group in the whole European theater. The 357 Fighter Group was the top Mustang group. One of the most feared Mustang groups was the 352nd Fighter Group. They had the Blue Nose, and that all came because originally they just had like their spinner blue, and one day, trying to psych them out, German propaganda found out they were escorting a bomber raid, and they called them the Blue Nose Bastards. And they said, we'll be waiting for you Blue Nose Bastards. You might as well just stay home, because if we see a blue nose on there, they had escorted a bomber raid, previously. And they said, if we're hunting those blue noses, you better hide from us. So they said, oh yeah? So they painted the entire nose of the airplane blue and basically said, yeah, come get us, here we are. So those really successful fighter groups that the Germans began to fear, this was like a psychological warfare. When those younger, less experienced pilots would see those bright colors, that would throw them off their game immediately. For a group like this, unfortunately, it became known as the hard luck group, because they just, I don't know what it was, they supposedly had great leadership and everything, they just didn't do as well as others, but they had one of the most unique and colorful marking systems on their airplanes. And as much as it was psychological warfare against the enemy, it could be great psyching up for the good guys. So, if you're in the 8th Air Force and you're flying a bomber and you're waiting for your escorts to show up and you see the color scheme of what is a fantastic fighter group, you see that and you get a little more emboldened and you're ready to go fly your mission. Tuskegee Airmen, the Red Tails, that's a great example. Originally they got their Mustangs secondhand from a whole bunch of other fighter groups. When they transitioned from their B's and C's to the D's, they handed over the B's and C's to the 332nd, to the Tuskegee Airmen. So they had all sorts of different markings on the nose, but they painted the entire tail red. So when those bomber crews saw the red tails, they felt good, they felt safe, they focused entirely on their mission. And it was good. It was a good psych up for friendly forces to see those markings of the really well-performing fighter groups. And to some of the guys on the ground, too, as the war progressed inland in Europe, when the Luftwaffe was really whittled down, they released a lot of these 8th Air Force units to do ground attack. And the 9th Air Force, don't forget, was the Tactical Air Force. They were doing ground attack. Guys on the ground would get familiar with some of these markings, too. And they would kind of, when they needed support, or they would see guys overhead, they would recognize some and recognize, well, those guys are really good at what they do. During the whole push through Europe, General Patton worked very closely with an Air Corps General, Pete Quesada, who learned a lot from the British and the Australians in North Africa and brought that to the 9th Air Force. And they really did a lot. They were the first time that you really had coordination with pilots on the ground with armored forces, with fighter radios talking to pilots in the sky. Anyway, I'm getting a little off track here, but so these color schemes were well known to friendlies, and they would kind of be very excited to see certain color schemes. And ultimately what these color schemes did, you got to remember that back then, all combat was visual. You looked out of your cockpit and you physically saw something. When I was directing an intercept, when I was a controller, and I was actually talking to a pilot on the radio, and I was directing him at a target on a radar, I would commit that fighter. I would tell that pilot, you need to point your plane in this direction. I'm committing you on a target that was 80, 90 nautical miles away. This pilot couldn't even see it on his radar yet, and that's where air combat starts. And, we have beyond visual range missiles. We have missiles that, I can't say the actual range of where they can shoot, but there are missiles in the world that can shoot farther than some fighter radars can even see. It's a whole different world. Back then, your max effective range was as far as you could see the target, basically. A 50 caliber machine gun doesn't go effectively and accurately much more than a mile, not to mention those machine guns on the wings are angled and tuned to have a focal point in front of the plane. It's not just an infinity, range. They come together at a certain point. and they're kind of fine-tuned on the ground. So, what these colors also did was in the midst of air combat where you could only shoot at what you could actually see and everything's moving real fast, this was one of the first identification friend and foe systems. When you had ME-109s and you had P-51D and Cs, which in the heat of the moment do look similar, you could look for those colors. And whether you're a gunner in a B-17 or you're a pilot flying in a Mustang, the first thing you do when you line up a shot is do I see bright magenta and blue diamonds on the nose, or do I see RLM green and gray camouflage? Okay, I don't see red on the nose, it's not one of my guys, I can shoot. So it also helped eliminate a lot of potential friendly fire. It's not talked about a lot, but there was a lot of friendly fire that went on, especially from bomber gunners who got nervous and shot at anything around them. And the actual, fortunately or unfortunately, the actual number of fighters downed by bomber gunners was pretty small. But there were a lot of friendly fighters that took rounds from American bomber gunners just because it's hard to tell sometimes. But when they switched color schemes to stuff like this, the amount of friendly fire really went down, So anyway, this is a little history of why we ended the war with, we went from planes that were, green, dull, subdued camouflage to these kind of bright, flamboyant, look at me type planes. They make great modeling subjects, but when you think of them in the context of kind of how I described it, it really does make sense why they ended up looking like this. So let's take a look at the kit now. We'll start with the main fuselage pieces. It is, excellently finely engraved panel lines all throughout. Really nice crisp detail. This is the inside of the cockpit. I can't really call it a cockpit tub, but usually aux fuel tank and some of the texturing in there, rudder. We've got the cellulose, and we've got aluminum wing tanks, which is cool. Let's see. We've got cuffed propeller blades. You've got positionable flaps so they can be up or down. Let's see. Separate elevators, so elevators up or down, which is cool. You can get a separate stand for this, so you can build a landing gear up, or you can slice the doors open and have landing gear down. So you have that option. Pilot right there. I don't know if we're going to focus on the pilot, are we? There we go. Nice detail on the pilot. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us the option for early model tail without the fillet. There's two tails here. I'm not quite sure why. I know one of these models has the direction finder on it, antenna on it. One of the decaling options, and that might have something to do with it. It'd be great if they gave us the option for the filletless tail, but so you could build an early model if you wanted. Actually, you don't have to slice the landing gear doors. Look at that; they give you separate landing gear doors and everything. That's cool. So got that. Some extra weapon options if you choose to build the Air Commando group marking version. And then we've got wheels. Looks like weighted and unweighted tires. That's cool. Some more landing gear doors, cockpit interior parts, gun barrels, shrouded and unshrouded exhausts, bombs, a little bit of flashing here and there, but nicely done. Overall, great texturing on the seat. Looks like it's going to be a fun kit to build, and I'm kind of excited to get started with this. So I am going to, oh, we didn't look at the decals. The decals look really good. Really nicely done on there. You can barely see the carrier film on everything. Super exciting for me for the spinner stripes. All we've got to do is give it an insignia blue base, and we've got stripes. Yes. And of course, full stencil in here. So let me get set up with some glue and paint and basic supplies. Clear parts that I haven't taken out of the bag yet, and I'm not going to avoid scratching them, but it looks like we've got standard canopy and Dallas canopy, which is nice too. Okay. I'm going to get everything set up, and we're going to start building this thing.